This is the Funkey S, and it is probably the smallest handheld I've ever seen. To give you a sense of scale of how small this thing actually is, here's the Game Boy Advance, which it's based off of, and you can see that it's a fraction of the size. And honestly, it's about the size of a cartridge for the Game Boy Advance. When I first saw these being sold online, I pretty much knew I immediately had to get my hands on it. Portability is one of the things that I value most in a handheld, so when I saw the Funkey S, which can basically fit anywhere, I got really excited that this might be the true pick up and play experience that I've always dreamed of since I was a kid. That being said, I had seen a fair amount of skepticism regarding this product, with many writing it off as a novelty toy that's not suitable for any serious gaming. Along with that, there's been a fair amount of mini handhelds that have sprung onto the market. Most notably, there's the Mewmore Mini, which is cheaper and has gotten a lot of praise from various people. I've had the Funkey S for some time now, so did it live up to my expectations? Well, I'd say the answer is kinda complicated. Looking at the hardware, you can see that I've listed the processor and the RAM on the right, and if that means absolutely nothing to you, don't worry, you'll get to see this thing in action and get an idea of what the performance is gonna look like. Overall, I'd say that when it came to the games I played, performance was never really an issue. However, what was an issue was the screen. The Funkey S has a 1.54-inch IPS display with a resolution of 240 by 240 pixels. Considering that the Funkey S is emulating a whole host of systems, each with their own native resolution, what they're gonna look like on the Funkey screen is gonna be a mixed bag. I'd say I really noticed this when comparing Pokemon on the Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance. On the Game Boy Color, whether I chose to keep the games to their original scale or stretch them out to take up the whole screen, the games actually still look pretty good. On the other hand, you can see that Pokemon on the Game Boy Advance looks pretty stretched out if I choose to fill the whole screen. However, if I set it to scale, then it really only takes up a portion of what is already a really small screen. The refresh rate of the screen is also only 50 Hz, so screen tearing is going to be an issue for games that run at 60 frames per second. In my experience, it was pretty noticeable in the quick moving platformers like Sonic and Yoshi's Island. Personally, it's never really bothered me much, but I know for some it can be an automatic deal breaker. Looking at the buttons, I'd say they feel very clicky, and this is really sold by the sound that they make when you press on them. It may not be to everybody's preference, but personally, I find these buttons pretty satisfying to use. I'd say the best way to describe them is that they feel very toy-like, which I think is the aesthetic that Funkey is going for. I'm also happy they went with the clamshell design. It just makes this tiny thing more portable and saves the screen from getting any damage. Customization is always a bonus, so I'm glad they included these extra colors in case you have a certain preference. It also comes with a mini lanyard, so you can use it as a keychain like advertised. What's not as fun is the ergonomics. My hands aren't that small, so as you can see, they pretty much take up almost all 4 of the buttons. I suppose it was somewhat to be expected, but it does become a problem when my thumb slides over the other buttons, which is very common. If you're planning on playing games that require tight controls like platformers, you're not going to have a very good time on this thing. But holding it one-handed, this thing actually feels pretty good, and I could see this being usable for slower paced games like turn-based RPGs. Now let's talk about what I think really sells this system, and that's going to be its portability. Obviously this thing is very small, but when I say portability, I think there's another element to it. Where the Funkey S really shines is how it perfects the pick up and play experience. This is really thanks to the built-in operating system, the Funkey OS. When you turn your Funkey S on, you can see that you're greeted with a very nice and organized interface. You just list your system and it'll list out all the appropriate ROMs. If you want to add more ROMs, it's as simple as dragging and dropping the ROM file into the appropriate folder where everything is once again neatly organized for you. You can also put cover art into the folder so the Funkey can display it while you're browsing through the titles. The most out of your way you'll have to go with the Funkey S is getting a GBA and PS1 BIOS if that's something you're interested in playing, but really that just dissolves into another drag and drop. Once you're ready to play, the Funkey S will boot up your game incredibly fast. I've really never had to wait more than maybe a couple seconds. Once you're done, you can either choose to exit using the menu button, or you can just close the system, and this will automatically save your state. Once you either open the system back up, or select the game again, you'll see that you'll be able to pick up exactly where you left off. This streamlining of the experience really makes it possible to pretty much play this thing anywhere under any scenario. It really feels like playing games on the Funkey S is just as simple as sending a text on your smartphone. And this is where I get really mixed feelings about the system. Although the screen has its issues, I think the biggest drawbacks of the Funkey S aren't really with the hardware or the software. Rather, it's with the caveats that come with making such a portable device. The console is tiny enough to basically fit anywhere, the emulation capabilities are pretty spot on, and the UI is streamlined enough to where everything is perfect for quick on-the-go gaming sessions. But the Funkey S is so small that realistically, a large chunk of the games that are playable on this thing just aren't going to be a good time. Even though smartphones can do a better job at emulating than most handhelds, I think the reason there's a market for them is people just like the feeling of a handheld. The feeling that you get when you press the buttons while having the weight of the console in your hand is just something that a touchscreen emulator is not going to be able to replicate. So when thinking about whether I would recommend the Funkey S, the question I came up with was whether I would recommend it over touchscreen emulators on your phone. The honest answer is probably not. Long story short, the Funkey S absolutely delivers on being an incredibly portable console, but that portability comes at a cost that I don't think most people are going to be willing to pay. Maybe I was expecting too much out of this little guy, but at around $75 US, if you're looking for a handheld to seriously play games on, I can't say I'd recommend the Funkey S. Really, the only exception I would make is if you're only looking to play perhaps turn-based RPGs, like Pokemon, that don't really rely on precise inputs. So if you're trying to play those games in the most portable way possible and don't mind the small screen, then the Funkey S really does excel at that niche. But for everybody else, I imagine you'd lose interest in the Funkey S very quickly. That being said, as a handheld enthusiast, I'm actually really happy that I own this thing. Even if it's a bit of a novelty, this is such a tiny and unique device that I definitely feel as though it belongs in the collection of anyone who would consider themselves a handheld enthusiast. It's not a portable for everyone, but I'm still really happy that it exists. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, consider subscribing to the channel. Take care everyone.